1912, Virginia. On the outskirts of Richmond, the Whitmore family prepared for a portrait that would later become infamous. The stately home stood proudly among sprawling lawns and ancient oak trees, its walls lined with generations of painted faces. Each canvas depicted ancestors with composed expressions and elegant attire, staring silently as though judging the living. That summer day, the family gathered for another painting, arranging themselves meticulously, postures straightened, hands clasped, smiles rehearsed. But behind one smile lay a secret too dark for the frame. A corpse concealed within the walls, hidden from view. A ghost trapped behind plaster and wallpaper, waiting to be discovered decades later. The contrast was immediate: family unity versus hidden evil, innocence versus horror, beauty versus decay, perfection versus corruption. Observers, neighbors, and servants recalled the day with unease. Some noted subtle tensions: a hand lingering too long on a shoulder, a glance exchanged that carried unspoken weight, a child unusually silent. The facade of civility was flawless, yet something in the household's atmosphere felt off, as if the walls themselves were aware of the secret they concealed. Scholars argue that trauma, greed, and the relentless pressure to maintain appearance created conditions for deception. Psychological analysis suggests that social expectation, combined with personal ambition or desperation, may have warped moral judgment, producing behavior that was chilling in its precision. The family portrait, outwardly a symbol of harmony, concealed moral decay, raising questions about the capacity for darkness to hide behind ordinary human life. Historians and local storytellers have long debated the nature of the concealment. Was it an accident, a desperate attempt to hide a tragic death, or deliberate? Some argue the corpse was the result of familial greed, jealousy, or revenge. Others hint at an even more sinister presence, a malevolent influence tied to the estate itself. Whispers pass through generations, each retelling adding layers of horror. Faint cries at night, shadows moving across empty halls, the faint smell of decay lingering in the air. The blending of documented history with folklore deepens the sense of ambiguity. Viewers are drawn into a world where reason clashes with speculation, fact collides with myth, and the line between truth and imagination grows ever thinner. The introduction establishes the duality central to the story: public appearance versus hidden reality, innocence versus evil, normalcy versus terror. It foreshadows the unfolding drama, promising tension and suspense, while challenging the audience to question human morality and the persistence of secrets. From the very first sentence, the tale insists on reflection. Can evil truly hide behind a perfect smile? Can appearances, no matter how polished, mask acts so profoundly disturbing that history itself struggles to make sense of them? The portrait becomes both literal and symbolic, an enduring question captured forever on canvas, and an invitation to explore the hidden horrors behind the Whitmore family's legacy. From the outside, the Whitmore family embodied the pinnacle of Virginia aristocracy. Their estate, a sprawling manor on the outskirts of Richmond, stood as a testament to generations of wealth and influence. The home's white columns gleamed in the sunlight. Gardens were immaculately maintained, and portraits of ancestors gazed down from the walls with an air of timeless judgment. Visitors admired the family for their grace and refinement, noting the elegance of formal dinners, the precision of social gatherings, and the seamless integration of tradition into daily life. To the public eye, everything was pristine. The Whitmores were the embodiment of civility, taste, and propriety. But behind this polished exterior, the family harbored tensions that festered quietly, like cracks beneath a painted surface, threatening to fracture the fragile veneer of perfection. Sibling rivalries ran deep. The eldest son, Thomas Whitmore, was groomed to inherit the estate, a role that instilled both pride and resentment among his younger siblings. Mary Whitmore, the second-born, felt constrained by societal expectations, her intelligence and ambition stifled by the rigid hierarchy of inheritance. The youngest, Samuel, seemed almost fragile, prone to melancholy and introspection, often withdrawing from the family's public performances. Thus, personal dynamics created a complex web of alliances, grudges, and subtle manipulations, where smiles were polite masks hiding private ambitions. Psychological contrast emerges here: public admiration versus private corruption, familial love versus betrayal, obedience versus rebellion. Each family member navigated the tightrope between duty and desire, fear and strategy, Financial pressure added another layer of tension. Thought the estate symbolized wealth, its coffers were strained. Agricultural downturns, poor investments, and lingering debts from previous generations forced the Whitmores to maintain appearances at a cost. Social expectation demanded lavish entertaining, formal dinners, and charitable acts, yet the resources to sustain such a lifestyle were dwindling. This dissonance between image and reality fostered resentment and desperation. Every decision carried the weight of inheritance, reputation, and survival. Psychological scrutiny suggests that when pride, fear, and greed intersect, ordinary people may adopt extraordinary measures, rationalizing behavior that in other circumstances would be deemed immoral or unthinkable. The Whitmores, consciously or unconsciously, internalized this tension, creating fertile ground for tragedy. Observers from the surrounding town noted peculiarities that, at the time, were dismissed as eccentricities or the quirks of old wealth. The family rarely interacted with servants directly, relying instead on subtle gestures, whispered instructions, or coded glances. Local clergy, including Reverend Jonathan Harker, occasionally remarked on the family's peculiar solemnity, noting that Sunday prayers sometimes carried an undertone of unease. Servants, too, whispered among themselves of cold silences, in the manor's hallways, of subtle arguments that erupted behind closed doors, and of fleeting shadows glimpsed in the corners of rooms. While outwardly devoted to decorum and ritual, the Whitmores seemed to operate within a private world governed by unseen hierarchies, unspoken rules, and emotional undercurrents that the public could neither perceive nor understand. The psychological landscape of the household was complex. Envy manifested in subtle behaviors, a smirk, a silent sigh, a lingering glance of disdain. Control was exerted not through force but through social manipulation, adherence to rigid routines, and leveraging societal norms to reinforce dominance. Moral compromise became a silent contract, agreed upon implicitly by all family members. Appearances mattered above all, and secrets were preserved to protect status. This dynamic created a tension-filled environment where every interaction, every ritual, and even mundane domestic activities carried the weight of latent menace. A simple dinner could conceal grudges. A casual conversation might be a battle of influence. A family portrait could hide far darker truths than any observer might suspect. Blend of fact and fiction emerges vividly here. The estate's documented features, ornate dining halls, hidden passageways, extensive libraries, offer plausibility to the narrative. Fictionalized accounts of servants, housekeepers, and local clergy provide texture and psychological depth, illustrating how human perception and suspicion interact with secrecy. Imagined details, such as a servant's account of hearing muffled sobs behind the nursery walls or a clergy member noting an unexplainable chill in the drawing room, deepen the sense of unease. These elements serve to foreshadow the infamous portrait session, hinting that beneath polished smiles and impeccable dress, secrets festered, secrets capable of producing outcomes far darker than simple familial discord might suggest. The contrast between beauty and decay, civility and moral corruption is omnipresent. The Whitmore Manor, a physical manifestation of prestige and refinement, becomes a metaphor for the family itself. Outwardly elegant, inwardly rotting. Every perfectly arranged room, every carefully staged social gathering, represents a veneer of control, masking emotions and actions that could destabilize the family entirely. Even in leisure, walks through manicured gardens, carriage rides through neighboring towns, or afternoon teas, the psychological tension remained palpable, hinting at underlying resentment, manipulation, and potential violence. By establishing these dynamics, the audience begins to understand that the Whitmore household was not merely a setting, but a character in its own right. The manor absorbed and reflected the ambitions, fears, and moral compromises of its inhabitants. The carefully choreographed routines of daily life carried latent threat. Even ordinary rituals, such as meals, prayers, or family portraits, could be weaponized, intentionally or subconsciously, by those attuned to subtle cues and power hierarchies. This sets the stage for the infamous portrait session, where the seemingly mundane act of arranging for a photograph becomes a nexus of tension, suspicion, and hidden danger. As the narrative unfolds, viewers are invited to consider the psychological and moral dimensions of the Whitmore family, Was human ambition alone sufficient to produce the darkness that would later emerge? Or did the family's environment, legacy, and isolation amplify latent tendencies toward malevolence? Were the tensions, rivalries, and secrets products of circumstance, or did they hint at something more enduring and sinister embedded within the lineage? The audience is left to navigate these questions, alongside the unfolding drama, feeling the subtle, ever-present sense of menace that pervaded the Whitmore estate and its inhabitants, understanding that beneath every polite smile and perfectly arranged table, a hidden world of psychological and moral complexity waited to erupt. The summer of 1912 arrived with oppressive heat that seemed to hang over the Whitmore estate, casting long shadows across manicured lawns and sun-dappled corridors. It was the day the family had long awaited, the portrait session, intended to capture the Whitmores in their finest attire, immortalizing the lineage for generations to come. On the surface, the event appeared perfectly ordinary, a ritualized celebration of heritage and status. But beneath the carefully composed smiles and polished manners, tension simmered, almost imperceptibly like a shadow moving in the corner of the room. The contrast was immediate: ceremonial precision versus underlying menace, the illusion of family unity versus a complex lattice of rivalry, resentment, and unspoken grievances. From early morning, the household stirred with anxious energy. Servants moved through the halls like silent sentinels, arranging chairs, polishing silver, and ensuring that every detail reflected perfection. Mrs. Whitmore, matriarch of the family, oversaw preparations with a meticulous eye, issuing curt instructions that masked deeper unease. One maid later recalled an oddly misplaced glove, lying abandoned on the stairs, which seemed to signal a disturbance in the day's carefully choreographed rhythm. Shadows seemed to linger in hallways, bending unnaturally in corners, and some servants swore they glimpsed figures moving where no one should have been. These subtle signs, though unremarkable to the casual observer, suggested that beneath the polished routine, an undercurrent of unease permeated the estate. As the photographer Jonathan Crane arrived with his equipment, a large, cumbersome camera mounted on a wooden tripod, the family assumed the familiar performance of arranging for the portrait. Crane, a man known for precision and patience, noted the unusual stiffness in the family's poses and the slight tremor in Thomas Whitmore's hand. The room, bathed in natural light, was filled with the faint scent of polished wood and blooming flowers from the estate's gardens. Yet Crane sensed something off. The smiles appeared rehearsed, eyes darted with a subtle wariness, and whispered exchanges passed between siblings with alarming rapidity. Crane's own journal, later uncovered, hinted at unease. Each expression feels calculated, yet beneath it, a tension I cannot name. The walls themselves seemed to breathe. Neighbors and local gentry had been invited to observe the session, ostensibly to witness the family's presentation and to pay homage to tradition. They arrived with curiosity, unaware of the undercurrents at play. The Whitmores greeted them with customary civility, yet each interaction was weighted with silent negotiations of status, dominance, and subtle intimidation. Mary Whitmore, in particular, exhibited a wary nervousness, her hands clasped tightly, her posture rigid, as if resisting an invisible force guiding her movements. The contrast between the ceremony and the psychological tension was stark, outward composure masking an internal storm. Observers remarked later on the peculiar energy in the room, noting how minor details, a twitch, a lowered gaze, a hesitant gesture, hinted at unspoken discord. Psychological manipulation became central to the day's events. Who controlled the poses? Who whispered instructions in hurried tones? Who enforced compliance? The matriarch, Mrs. Whitmore, exerted subtle dominance, guiding each movement with precision, ensuring that every member adhered to her vision of propriety. Even Thomas, groomed to inherit the estate, responded with a mechanical obedience that suggested fear rather than respect. Subordinates, maids, footmen, and the occasional visiting relative played their roles dutifully, yet the tension between authority and subservience created an atmosphere thick with latent menace. Every movement, every gesture, was a small act of control, a negotiation of power carefully orchestrated behind the veneer of family ritual. Letters and diaries from the period provide insight into the day's psychological landscape. A local doctor, Dr. Edwin Mallory, who had been invited under the pretense of observing for social propriety, noted a peculiar anxiety in the household. There is a rigidity, a silence beneath the smiles as if some presence watches, unseen yet palpable. Local gossip whispered of minor incidents, the anxious behavior of a servant named Clara, the sudden disappearance of Asmal's dog, and the fleeting appearance of a shadow in the gallery window. While these accounts are partially fictionalized, they serve to illustrate the subtle foreshadowing of danger and the interplay between ordinary life and the extraordinary tension of the day. As the session progressed, small anomalies began to emerge, unnoticed by some, glaring to others attuned to subtle cues. A misplaced chair in the drawing room suggested hurried movement. An unopened letter lay on the desk, its contents unknown but ominous. Faint sounds echoed through the hallways, whispers perhaps or the creaking of ancient floorboards. The contrast between ceremonial precision and psychological disturbance grew ever more pronounced. Guests assumed these details were inconsequential, yet each anomaly contributed to an overarching sense of unease, a creeping suspicion that something beyond ordinary concern hovered at the edges of perception. The portrait itself became a focal point of tension. Poses were adjusted repeatedly, expressions scrutinized under the photographer's discerning eye. Shadows fell unevenly across faces, creating distortions that suggested hidden emotions and unspoken truths. The camera captured more than mere likeness. It immortalized the fraught dynamics of power, envy, and fear. Even as smiles were painted upon lips, the eyes betrayed a spectrum of emotions: anxiety, resentment, and a glimmer of hidden knowledge. The portrait session, ostensibly a record of lineage and respectability, became a crucible in which human ambition, fear, and secrecy intersected, setting the stage for revelations that would unsettle both the Whitmore family and the wider community. Historical plausibility blends seamlessly with imagined tension. The estate's documented features, the long corridors, sunlit galleries, and hidden stairwells, anchor the narrative in reality, while fictionalized accounts of servant whispers, anxious glances, and shadowy presences create suspense. The interplay between fact and fiction encourages viewers to question the reliability of observation, the malleability of perception, and the subtle manipulations inherent in familial hierarchies. Subtle foreshadowing of impending tragedy appears everywhere. A glove lying out of place, a hesitant glance, a shadow moving unnaturally. The audience senses that the portrait is more than a mere image. It is a moment where human behavior, latent conflict, and possibly darker forces converge. By the end of the session, unease permeated the house. The camera captured the family frozen in perfection, yet beneath that stillness simmered tension that could not be fully contained. Servants whispered of a peculiar chill. Neighbors recalled anxious glances. And even the photographer left with a sense of discomfort he could neither explain nor dismiss. The portrait, intended as a celebration of lineage and propriety, instead became a harbinger, a subtle indicator of secrets lying just beyond perception. Secrets that would later culminate in revelations shaking the very foundation of the Whitmore family and the town itself. The session's conclusion left viewers and participants alike suspended between admiration and suspicion. The combination of ritual, psychological tension, and subtle foreshadowing created a tableau that was at once ordinary and extraordinary, familiar yet ominous. Every gesture, glance, and shadow hinted at hidden narratives, signaling that even in moments of apparent civility, danger and mystery lurked, waiting to be uncovered. The portrait session was no longer just a photograph. It was a convergence of power, secrecy, and latent menace, setting the stage for events that history would struggle to explain, leaving observers questioning the boundaries of human ambition, morality, and the unseen forces that shape behavior. Decades passed before the Whitmore estate revealed its darkest secret. By the mid-20th century, the once pristine manor showed signs of age and neglect. Roof tiles sagged under time's weight, corridors groaned beneath each footstep, and the walls, which had long conveyed grandeur and family pride, began to whisper of decay. Renovations were planned, intended to restore the estate to its former splendor, but they would uncover a truth far more disturbing than crumbling plaster or water-stained ceilings. Within a hidden compartment behind a false panel in the grand library, or perhaps beneath the floorboards of the upstairs gallery, accounts vary, a human corpse was discovered. The discovery sent shockwaves through the local community. Contrast was immediate and jarring. Preservation versus decay, history versus horror, family pride versus concealed malevolence. A lineage celebrated for refinement and propriety now became synonymous with hidden death and mystery. Eyewitnesses recall the scene with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Renovation workers described the panel giving way under their tools, revealing skeletal remains bundled carefully as if intentionally concealed. The body, remarkably preserved by the controlled environment behind the wall, suggested premeditation. Dr. Edwin Mallory, a local historian and amateur forensic observer, was among the first called to the site. He meticulously documented the discovery, the positioning of the corpse, traces of decay, and anomalies suggesting unnatural circumstances. The room, once a site of elegance and social display, now became a locus of morbid curiosity. He noted in his journal, "I cannot reconcile the care with which the body was hidden and the apparent violence of its concealment. There is deliberation here, a conscious act of concealment that betrays both intelligence and callousness." Historical records and early 20th century investigative methods informed the narrative. Forensics at the time were rudimentary compared to modern standards. Poisons, from arsenic to strychnine, could be undetectable in skeletal remains, while suffocation or mechanical restraint left minimal evidence once decomposition had progressed. Accidental causes, such as falls or structural collapse, were considered but ultimately seemed implausible given the careful concealment. The corpse's placement suggested intent. Someone had deliberately chosen this hidden space, manipulating architecture to erase evidence. Psychological interpretation adds depth. Jealousy among siblings, greed for inheritance, or even moral delusion could have motivated a calculated concealment, transforming domestic conflict into fatal consequence. Townsfolk offered conflicting accounts, blending fact and folklore. Older residents claimed that strange noise had long emanated from the manor's walls, faint cries dismissed as mice or wind. Some remembered servants disappearing without explanation or expressing unusual anxiety. A neighbor, Mrs. Abigail Fenwick, recalled a day in 1912 when she visited the estate and felt an unexplainable chill in the gallery. "I cannot describe it," she said decades later. The room seemed alive with expectation, as if waiting for something dreadful. Such accounts, though anecdotal, cast long shadows over the rational investigation. Folklore intertwined with observation, producing a narrative in which truth and imagination were difficult to separate. The discovery reignited debate about motives. Did a single family member act out of selfishness or vengeance? Was the concealment part of a broader pattern of manipulation within the Whitmore household? Forensic suggestions of poisoning, suffocation, or mechanical restraint were all plausible. Consider the psychological dimensions. A matriarch seeking to preserve control over her family, a son acting from envy, or a servant coerced into complicity under fear of reprisal. Human ambition, when combined with secrecy and social pressure, can catalyze acts of profound evil, and the Whitmore estate exemplified this intersection. Philosophers and psychologists alike questioned whether this was an isolated act of malice or reflective of larger societal and familial pathology. Modern investigators and historians revisiting the case emphasized ambiguity. Some argued the corpse's concealment represented the ultimate assertion of control, a family willing to erase evidence of transgression to preserve reputation. Others suggested the possibility of supernatural influence, a malevolent presence animating human behavior, compelling secrecy and concealment. Interviews with descendants, though often inconclusive, revealed lingering tension. Pride in lineage mingled with shame at the hidden corpse. A complex psychological inheritance as powerful as the architectural one. Even today, the manor evokes fascination and dread. Visitors claim to hear footsteps in empty rooms, doors creaking in the absence of wind, and shadows moving along walls where no human presence exists. The societal impact of the discovery was profound. Newspapers reported the story with sensational headlines, blending fact with speculation. Editorials debated whether the crime, if indeed intentional, reflected moral failings of the Whitmores or the pressures of early 20th century Southern society. Social psychologists suggest that secrecy, hierarchy, and rigid adherence to decorum can create environments conducive to concealment of transgression. The Whitmore case became a textbook example of how status and appearance can mask profound moral corruption. Philosophical debates emerged. To what extent is human behavior determined by circumstance versus character? Was this a singular tragic aberration, or a symptom of systemic pressure exerted by wealth, tradition, and expectation? Eyewitness narratives continued to conflict. Renovation workers claimed the smell of decay lingered long after the corpse's removal. Some reported feeling an oppressive weight, a sense of being watched, or sudden chills in empty rooms. Local clergy, including a fictionalized Reverend Jonathan Harker, noted that even in prayer, The family's legacy exerted a psychological shadow over the community. These accounts, real or reconstructed, highlight the difficulty in separating perception from reality, especially when collective memory and folklore intertwine. Town gossip blurred the line between observation and embellishment, producing a story at once historically grounded and mythic in its resonance. The discovery also prompted forensic reassessment. Anthropologists examined skeletal remains for trauma indicators. Historians cross-referenced family diaries, letters, and legal records, and psychologists attempted to reconstruct family dynamics. Yet ambiguity persisted. Conflicting evidence, partial documentation, and subjective recollections created a mosaic in which definitive conclusions were impossible. The corpse itself became a symbol of unresolved tension, a nexus of human ambition, fear, secrecy, and possibly forces beyond comprehension. Philosophically, the case raises enduring questions. Was the crime the product of one mind, executing calculated concealment for gain or vengeance? Or does it reflect a broader cultural pathology, where societal expectation, rigid hierarchy, and secrecy conspire to produce acts of hidden evil? The discovery resonates because it confronts viewers with the limits of understanding, preservation and decay. Appearance and reality, pride and horror, coexist in a single moment, frozen behind a panel in the Whitmore estate. The story forces reflection on the nature of evil, the fragility of trust, and the enduring tension between fact and legend. In the aftermath, the estate's legacy shifted from one of wealth and propriety to one of suspense and moral questioning. The discovery of the corpse not only challenged historical narratives, but also reshaped local memory. Townsfolk, historians, and amateur investigators continued to debate the events, blending psychology, social critique, and folklore. The manor's walls, once silent witnesses to the Whitmores' lives, now stood as enduring symbols of hidden darkness. The corpse, removed and studied, could not erase the questions it provoked. What drove a family to conceal death? Was it malice, fear, or cultural compulsion? And, most hauntingly, did the evil reside in the individuals themselves? Or did the house, as a repository of history and secrecy, nurture it into being? The morning after the discovery of the Whitmore corpse, Richmond awoke to a story that would dominate conversation for months, even years. Newspapers carried sensational headlines. Estate's secret revealed, Whitmore corpse discovered behind manor walls, and prestigious family's dark legacy emerges in shocking discovery. Public reaction was immediate. A mixture of disbelief, horror, and fascination. Neighbors gathered at the edge of the estate's grounds, their whispers carrying across the summer air, blending speculation with fear. The contrast was stark. Law versus folklore, rational investigation versus collective memory, and truth versus rumor. The town, bound by social proximity and shared history, struggled to reconcile the horror with the Whitmores' long-standing reputation for civility, wealth, and prominence. Authorities responded swiftly, though with the limitations of early 20th century investigative methods. Police inspectors examined the scene with meticulous care, documenting the placement of the corpse, measuring the dimensions of the hidden compartment, and recording notes on architectural anomalies. Photographs were taken, sketches made, and their remains carefully removed for study. Detective Harold Sinclair, assigned to the case, wrote in his report, "The concealment suggests deliberation, intelligence, and forethought. We are faced with a family who, despite outward appearances, harbored secrets so profound they defy ordinary comprehension." Such official statements framed the initial narrative but did little to assuage public fascination or speculation. Newspapers played a dual role, chronicling facts and shaping folklore. Journalists blended accounts from police reports, witness interviews, and local gossip, creating a narrative in which horror and history intertwined. Letters to editors revealed townsfolk grappling with disbelief. Some insisted the corpse had been there for decades, an unfortunate accident overlooked in life. Others suspected deliberate malevolence, a crime hidden by fear, social standing, or familial complicity. One letter, published in the Richmond Gazette, read, "The Whitmores seemed so upright, so civilized. And yet behind those smiles death lay waiting. How are we to trust appearances ever again?" Such correspondence highlights the tension between rational explanation and collective speculation, illustrating the interplay of grief, fear, and social dynamics. Witness testimony added further complexity. Neighbors recalled peculiar behavior in the years before the discovery, unusual silences during family gatherings, servants speaking in hushed tones about unexplained noises, and children avoiding certain rooms. Mrs. Abigail Fenwick, who lived across the street, recounted her childhood impressions. The house always felt wrong, not frightening exactly, but expectant, like it waited for something to happen. Servants, both contemporary and former, offered conflicting narratives. One spoke of routine domestic tension. Another suggested manipulation and coercion among family members. Family descendants provided ambiguous statements, offering partial admissions and deflecting responsibility, deepening the sense of uncertainty. These conflicting accounts underscore the psychological dynamics at play, demonstrating how grief, fear, and social pressure can shape memory, testimony, and interpretation. Local clergy became involved, both as advisors and moral commentators. Reverend Jonathan Harker, who had once observed the family during religious visits, issued statements blending fact with moral reflection. The house bore witness to human frailty. What we perceive as evil may be the accumulation of ambition, fear, and neglect. Yet we cannot ignore the possibility of willful malice, concealed behind the veneer of piety and respectability. Such reflections underscore the psychological and philosophical dimensions of thestery, the interplay of moral responsibility, social hierarchy, and the human capacity for secrecy. Clergy letters and diaries, though partially fictionalized for narrative effect, reveal ongoing tension within the community, illustrating the struggle to process an event that defied simple categorization. Psychological interpretation is central to understanding the town's reaction. Collective trauma, grief, and fear shaped both perception and narrative. Social dynamics dictated that some witnesses withheld information, while others exaggerated details to assert moral authority or align with prevailing gossip. Researchers later noted that proximity to the estate and social standing influenced testimony. Those closest to the family often minimized the horror, preserving their social bonds, while peripheral observers emphasized mystery, speculation, and sensationalism. This interplay reflects broader questions about memory, truth, and the persistence of narrative when confronted with shocking events. Fictionalized reconstructions of letters, diaries, and marginalia add texture to the investigation. An imagined servant's diary reads, "They smile as though nothing has happened, yet I see the weight in their eyes. Secrets linger here." Even after decades, the house breathes with them. Another, a local physician's journal, notes, "The psychological burden of the family's reputation seems almost tangible. Those who lived there walk carefully, aware that every misstep could unravel decades of hidden truths." Such accounts emphasize the tension between recorded fact and lived experience, creating a layered narrative in which multiple perspectives coexist without resolution. The moral philosophy embedded in the town's reaction is equally compelling. How do societies process events that simultaneously evoke horror, fascination, and disbelief? Were the Whitmores uniquely culpable, or did structural pressures, social expectation, familial hierarchy, and preservation of status create conditions for hidden evil? Scholars argue that the concealment of the corpse reflects a convergence of individual moral compromise and collective complicity. Communities often rationalize or obscure uncomfortable truths, blending rumor with observation to maintain social cohesion. In this case, the boundary between understanding and myth became increasingly porous, leaving the town suspended between fact and folklore. Conflicting accounts continued to emerge as investigators, historians, and amateur sleuths revisited the case. One report described servants claiming to hear faint crying within walls decades after the discovery, while another recounted neighbors witnessing fleeting shadows in unlit corridors. Local historians compiled oral histories, juxtaposing contemporary observations with archival documentation. Letters, photographs, and diaries painted a mosaic of uncertainty. Each piece of evidence invited interpretation, yet none provided certainty. The Whitmore estate became a site where rational analysis and superstition coexisted, where ambiguity itself became a defining characteristic of the narrative. Psychological tension also extended beyond the family, influencing the broader community. Townsfolk questioned their own perceptions. Had they been blind to warning signs? Were they complicit in ignoring abnormal behavior? Social trust eroded as the case gained notoriety, fostering an environment in which rumor and folklore flourished. Stories of spectral presences, moving shadows, and unexplainable sounds permeated local consciousness, blending with documented fact to create a legend in which history, memory, and imagination intertwined. The investigation itself highlighted limitations of early 20th century law enforcement. Police reports recorded meticulous details, yet the absence of forensic technology left many questions unanswered. Witness statements conflicted, documentary evidence was incomplete, and ambiguity persisted regarding motive and culpability. Some experts suggested financial gain as a primary motivator. Others posited psychological disturbance, while folklore inclined toward supernatural influence. The coexistence of rational and irrational explanations underscores the enduring tension between fact and legend, reason and imagination. In the aftermath, the Whitmore estate became a locus of reflection, debate, and speculation. The town struggled to reconcile horror with understanding, confronting moral questions about secrecy, responsibility, and the persistence of hidden evil. Letters, diaries, and reports, both real and fictionalized, illustrate the interplay of perception, interpretation, and narrative construction, demonstrating that communities process shocking events not as isolated incidents, but as complex webs of memory, belief, and cultural significance. Ultimately, the town's reaction and investigation emphasized the unresolved nature of the Whitmore legacy. The corpse, the estate, and the family history challenged conventional understanding of morality, social order, and human behavior. Law, folklore, psychology, and philosophy intersected, creating a mystery that resists closure. Observers are left to grapple with competing interpretations. Was the concealment a singular act of malice, a consequence of social pressure, or something inexplicably darker? The ambiguity persists, and with it, a lingering unease that continues to haunt both Richmond and those who study the Whitmore estate, bridging historical context with cultural memory and unresolved moral reflection. Over the decades following the discovery of the hidden corpse in the Whitmore estate, the story evolved from historical footnote into legend, whispered across Richmond and the surrounding counties. Scholars, townsfolk, and curious visitors debated the implications, each perspective contributing to an intricate tapestry of speculation, horror, and fascination. The contrast between science and supernatural, memory and myth, humanigency and fate framed this narrative, creating tension that refused resolution. The hidden corpse, once a shocking revelation, became a symbol of enduring mystery, a nexus where psychology, morality, and folklore intersected. Modern interpretations emerged as amateur historians, and psychology students revisited archival records, piecing together fragments of evidence from photographs, letters, police reports, and family diaries. Some proposed rational explanations: familial greed, psychological trauma, or accidental concealment. One theory suggested that a dispute over inheritance might have led to a hasty and desperate concealment of a death deemed inconvenient. Financial records indicated tension between siblings and possible misappropriation of estate funds, supporting a narrative in which human ambition catalyzed a horrific act. Psychological analysis suggested that the matriarch's control over the household could have fostered an environment in which obedience and fear suppressed moral reflection, allowing the concealment to occur without immediate challenge. Yet rational explanations were incomplete. Local lore, passed down through generations, injected the narrative with supernatural overtones. Reports of unexplained lights flickering in upstairs windows of the abandoned estate, cold drafts in uninhabited rooms, and shadows moving independently of human presence reinforced a sense that the house itself harbored residual malice. Witnesses occasionally described hearing faint whispers or the clatter of objects in empty corridors, and some claimed the presence of a fleeting figure glimpsed from peripheral vision. Skeptics attribute these experiences to expectation and imagination, while others argue that the house maintains a malevolent energy, a repository of unresolved grief and concealed evil. The interplay between rational explanation and supernatural speculation underscores the enduring tension at the heart of the Whitmore story. The mystery remains unsolved, compelling viewers to confront the limits of understanding. Memory and myth intermingle as historians attempt to reconcile documented facts with anecdotal accounts. Townsfolk recall servants expressing anxiety in whispered tones, neighbors noting odd behavior, and descendants recounting family secrets they had been cautioned never to reveal. Each layer adds ambiguity. What is verifiable? What is folklore? And what arises from human imagination shaped by fear and fascination? The manor itself becomes a character in the narrative, its architecture, shadows, and silent rooms contributing to the ongoing legend. The psychological phenomenon of collective memory suggests that communities construct stories to explain events that defy comprehension. And in the case of the Whitmore estate, This construction creates a dual reality in which the historical and the supernatural coexist. Moral philosophy offers further depth. The Whitmore case forces reflection on nature versus nurture, human curiosity, and the moral limits of secrecy. Were the concealment and death products of intrinsic human malice, or did social pressures, familial hierarchy, and rigid expectations create conditions conducive to moral compromise? Ethical theorists argue that the maintenance of social reputation, combined with fear of scandal, can lead to actions that, under normal circumstances, would be unthinkable. Psychological interpretations emphasize the allure of evil as a subject of fascination. Humans are drawn to narratives of hidden transgression, both to explore their own moral boundaries and to make sense of incomprehensible acts. The Whitmore estate exemplifies this interplay, providing a historical case study in which morality, secrecy, and human curiosity converge. Amateur investigators and psych students weigh in, offering divergent analyses that highlight the story's enduring ambiguity. One hypothesis suggests that the corpse's concealment was accidental, perhaps the result of a hasty, panicked act during a household dispute. Another emphasizes deliberate orchestration, pointing to architectural modifications in the estate that appear designed to conceal rather than preserve. A third posits a supernatural interpretation, invoking lingering spirits or malevolent forces associated with the property. Each theory relies on incomplete evidence and selective interpretation, emphasizing the difficulty in distinguishing between plausible human action and unexplained phenomena. The coexistence of multiple conflicting explanations ensures that the story remains unsettled, encouraging debate and reflection. Reports of unexplained phenomena persist, reinforcing the narrative's ambiguity. Visitors describe sudden chills, footsteps in empty halls, and shadows crossing corridors with no apparent source. Anecdotes of lights appearing in abandoned rooms at night, faint murmurs of voices and doors closing on their own add layers of intrigue. While skeptics point to environmental factors, perceptual biases, or suggestion, believers maintain that the estate retains a form of consciousness or residual energy, a force connected to the hidden corpse and the secrets of the Whitmore lineage. Such experiences blur the line between reality and imagination, offering viewers a liminal space where fear, curiosity, and wonder intersect. The dark legacy of the Whitmore estate extends beyond folklore into cultural memory. The story persists in local storytelling, historical research, and online forums, where modern investigators debate its plausibility and significance. Moral reflection continues. Is the horror a product of human malice, social complicity, or forces beyond human understanding? The Whitmore case forces confrontation with uncomfortable truths about family, society, and the limits of observation. Historical records, testimonies, and folklore coexist in tension, creating a narrative in which certainty is impossible, and every new interpretation raises further questions. Philosophically, the story resonates because it confronts viewers with the nature of ambiguity itself. Preservation of the estate, concealment of the corpse, and the subsequent emergence of legend illustrate how events can resist definitive interpretation. Human perception, memory, and storytelling intertwine, producing a layered narrative where rational analysis and supernatural speculation coexist. The Whitmore estate becomes a mirror, reflecting anxieties about morality, mortality, and the unknown. Audiences are compelled to question whether evil is intrinsic to human nature, emergent from circumstance, or embedded in places, objects, and memories, persisting long after the actors themselves have vanished. The interplay of memory, myth, psychology, and moral philosophy ensures that the Whitmore legacy remains unresolved. The hidden corpse, once discovered, transformed from a simple historical anomaly into a profound symbol of ambiguity, fear, and fascination. The estate, with its architectural idiosyncrasies and shadowed corridors, continues to evoke questions. Was the concealment motivated by greed, fear, or delusion? Did human agency alone account for the hidden death, or did broader forces, social, psychological, or supernatural, shape events? Are reported phenomena manifestations of residual energy, or products of expectation and imagination? These questions remain unanswered, leaving history suspended between fact and legend. Ultimately, the Whitmore estate endures as a locus of intrigue and reflection. Its narrative demonstrates the enduring human fascination with hidden crimes, secret histories, and the intersection of morality, psychology, and the unknown. No theory fully resolves the mystery. No explanation satisfies entirely. In this unresolved space, viewers are invited to participate, to weigh evidence, to consider motives, and to confront their own assumptions about evil, secrecy, and human behavior. The story's power lies not in resolution but in ambiguity, in the space between documented history and lingering legend, challenging each observer to navigate the uncertain terrain of truth and speculation. The Whitmore family portrait endures as a haunting symbol of the darkness that can dwell beneath the surface of even the most seemingly perfect lives. A single frame, frozen in time, conceals decades of secrecy, fear, and perhaps malevolence. The manor itself stands silent, yet the air is thick with lingering echoes. The creak off floorboards that should have long settled, laughter that seems to float through empty halls, and shadows that shift where no person treads. Contrast frames this legacy: memory versus reality, innocence versus evil, preservation versus decay. Each observer who peers into the story encounters tension between what is known and what is felt, between the rational mind and the imagination. Historical accounts, police records, and witness testimony offer fragments. Yet these collide with folklore, whispers, and unexplained phenomena, leaving viewers with a landscape of uncertainty. Psychological interpretation complicates understanding. Could ambition, jealousy, and social pressure alone explain the deliberate concealment of a corpse behind walls meant to impress and intimidate? Did familial dynamics warp morality so profoundly that one or more members could orchestrate such an act, balancing calculation with fear? Alternatively, do the reports of unexplained lights, shifting shadows, and sudden cold spots hint at something beyond human agency? Perhaps the house itself, steeped in the weight of history and secrecy, became a vessel for lingering energy, an embodiment of the very darkness it contained. The interplay of human psychology and environmental influence creates a chilling ambiguity, forcing viewers to confront the limits of logic and the shadowy edges of perception. The horror of the Whitmore estate persists, because the narrative refuses closure. Unlike conventional crime stories, there is no definitive culprit, no fully satisfying resolution. The corpse may have died in secrecy, but its presence resonates through memory, narrative, and cultural imagination. Each retelling becomes part of the story, as witnesses, historians, and modern audiences impose interpretation, moral judgment, and speculation. The estate's silence amplifies this effect. Empty rooms and boarded windows invite imagination, turning absence into presence, and absence of explanation into psychological weight. The legacy of concealment, secrecy, and perhaps even supernatural influence challenges assumptions about morality, trust, and the human capacity for darkness. Ultimately, the history of the Whitmore portrait leaves viewers suspended between reason and fear, history and legend. Could a single human mind orchestrate such calculated concealment? Or does evil linger in the very fabric of the house, in objects in memory, and in collective imagination? Perhaps the secret died with the corpse. Or perhaps it waits, hidden behind walls, in forgotten letters, and in the shadows cast by the painted smiles. Every retelling invites participation, forcing each observer to weigh evidence, question morality, and confront unease. The Whitmore legacy endures because it refuses resolution. It haunts the mind, the imagination, and the record of history itself. A story where ambiguity is the final, inescapable truth. What do you believe happened behind those smiles? The question lingers, unresolved, in memory, psychology, and legend, ensuring that the terror of the portrait never truly fades.